Right, musical.
Musical.
Come on, that's the last thing. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Just want to pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the Sabbath. We thank you that it's an invitation to spend time with you, resting with you and delighting in you and enjoying your presence. And thank you for your word, Lord. I thank you for the treasure that it is to us and the life that it gives us. I just pray, Lord, that you administer to each of us by the power of your Spirit as we look at this scripture today. I just pray, Lord, that you'd speak through me and that you reveal your truth to everybody. And I just thank you again, Lord, for bringing Dave to us and for making us a family, Lord. It's a good one, this one. This is all about the Korah. You can hear me properly now. This is all about the Korah rebellion. It's Numbers 16, 1 to number 16, 1 to 18, 32. Basically, I just want to explain where they've been so far. What's just happened is they've sent the spies into the land, haven't they? And the spies have come back and they give a bad report, and the people have said, "Oh, we don't like the sounds of that." They've actually rejected what God had promised them. And as a result of that, the Lord said, "Well, if you don't want it, fine, I'll give you what you want." And what they said is, "Oh no, we don't want to go and fight the giants, we'd rather just stay here in the wilderness." I said, "Okay, that's what you can have then." So they're not in a good place. The people aren't actually in a, hey, everything's great, isn't it? They're not in a good situation. Now, with regards to this, there's lessons that we'll learn from this Torah portion. I'll just explain quickly before we read through it what actually happens. You can imagine it, all the people are dead disgruntled. Well, we can't go to the promised land, we're stuck here. Obviously, when things aren't going well, they look for somebody to blame. They don't want to blame themselves, so what they do is they look to the leadership, don't they? And they see Moses and Aaron, and when they look at Moses, they think, "Look at him, miserable old crank there, who does he think he is?" And along comes Korah, who basically is a bit pizzazzy and a bit and he spouts all these words, and so these people are like, "Oh, we like him, we like him." One of the lessons is this: it says, using the God of Israel as an excuse to do what one wants to do is more dangerous than, for example, the black and white sin of the golden calf. And I mentioned this the other day. And actually, what's bizarre is 5 times the number of people who died at the golden calf died because of this rebellion. And the reason why it's so dangerous is because if something is a counterfeit, the closer it is to the truth, the more dangerous it is. You with me? If something is so blatantly, obviously not of God, it's really not that dangerous. It's when something has got that veneer of, "Oh, this is all God, this is brilliant." That's when it's dangerous. And that's when the Lord has to step in. And as we can see, 5 times more people were punished as a result of this particular rebellion. Now, this is all about people who've got a little bit of knowledge of the Lord, but what they do is they allow their own fleshly appetites, their own self-righteousness to completely distort and ruin their relationship with Yahweh. Now, things to bear in mind is that every rebellion, even this one, will have started with just a little whisper of discontent. That's why, as we've seen throughout the Torah, we're always to put a guard on our lips and always to be aware that it's small sparks and embers can build into big fires. Now, having studied this particular Torah portion, some people comment that around this time of year, people do get a bit fed up and they slack off on their study of the Word of God don't pray as much and get a bit discontented. I don't think it's happening here. I think it's the opposite. But this is what this.
It's also coming to like pagan time, really, isn't it? Some solstice somehow.
Yeah.
Or pagan worship.
Could possibly be connection.
Yeah.
But if you do these things, if you're slacking off, what tends to happen is miserableness creeps in. Our own miserableness affects other people as well. Now, what are we to do? We're not to focus on self-gratification, what we like, what we don't like, comforts, discomforts, and pining after the pleasures of the world. That's all nonsense. We have to keep our focus on the Torah and on the testimony of Yeshua. And there's one thing that's quite dangerous to us is our own sense of fairness and our own sense of right and wrong, because it's come from a fallen state and a fallen mind. We always have to reflect on what the scriptures tell us and always keep looking to what the scriptures tell us. Now, for a bit of information, Korah was a Kohathite, so he wasn't doing so bad, and he was already in the people God had chosen and separated. He was a Levite. He had a job to do, which was carrying the holy things, the Ark of the Covenant and the menorah and the like. So he had a decent position, but it wasn't good enough for him. Now I do like reading what the rabbis say, and this is what the rabbis say. This isn't in the scriptures, but I think it's quite funny. The rabbis say that the reason Korah rebelled, and all of them say this, it's not like just Lord one or two, it's because his wife put it in his head and was saying things like, "Ooh, you're better than that, Moses. Why are you letting him push it?" Oh. And you go, and she kept on with him and kept on with him. So in the end, it led to his, but if we look through the scriptures as well, there's another character in here. This is the bit that makes me laugh. His name was On. Right, now he's mentioned in the beginning of this Torah portion, but when it comes to the punishment, and when it comes to, all the people who get killed as a result, he escapes all that. And what people have actually said is, On was actually quite innocent, but it was only because he was in the near vicinity that he got dragged into it all, which is why we have to be very careful. This is all through the Torah, by the way. We have to be very careful who we associate with. But what happened to On was, apparently, his wife got him rotten drunk, stuck him in the tent. I don't know whether it's true, but I think it's good. She stuck him in the tent and she sat outside the tent and made her hair all dishevelled. So that when anybody came like looking for, his character On, where's On? We're supposed to be rebelling, where's On? He would have looked at the tent and they would have saw his wife was there with dishevelled hair. And in their culture, that meant that she was either mourning or she was drunk. Now, if she was mourning, you don't go up and ask her, it's like, oh, she's mourning, if she was drunk, a man, this is how different their culture is to our culture, a man could not approach a woman who was drunk because she wasn't in her right mind and she wouldn't have the will to possibly resist. And she might do something that she might not want to do. Isn't that completely, shows you how far our culture is from there. So anyway, she saved On, like disheveling her hair and stopping them coming together, apparently by getting him drunk. And some people reckon that this is what Paul's referring to when he says women shouldn't teach, and it's written in the law. And they reckon it's to do with this. I don't know. I'm only just putting that out there. We just have to bear these things in mind. Now, the way this is quite hideous as well. The way that this Korah went about trying to undermine the leadership is quite horrible, really, and it's quite horrible because I recognise it in people seen happening. He went about suggesting that some of the commandments were ridiculous. Some of Yahweh's commandments were ridiculous. Now, what his plan was, if he could make out that some of Yahweh's commandments were ridiculous, he could suggest that they must have come from Yahweh, it must have come from Moses' imagination. Thereby, if these commandments came from Moses' imagination, perhaps the idea that Moses should be in charge and Aaron should be the high priest also came from Moses' imagination. Are you with me? So what you've got here is a leader going around saying that Yahweh's commandments are ridiculous. And there's actually an example of it here. It says, they came and stood before Moses and they asked him, does a cloak made entirely of blue wool require tzitzit, or is it exempt? And he replied, it does require tzitzit. They began laughing at him, saying, is it possible that a cloak of another coloured material, one string of blue wool, exempts it? And this one, which is made entirely of blue wool, should not exempt itself. They were trying to trick him and make it look stupid. Now, I have had experience of people talking about scriptures and commandments and saying, don't be stupid. Yeah, as if you're supposed to keep that. That's nonsense. And belittling God's commandments. And I just would warn anybody who do that. All you're doing is following in the example that was set by Korah. Now, as I said before, the situation wasn't great for these people at this time. See, sometimes we read the scriptures, don't we, and think, how could they possibly follow this Korah geezer, even if he was flash? How could they do it? But you've got to bear in mind where their heads are at. They've just been told you're actually going to die in the wilderness. So they're actually in the wilderness waiting to die. They must have felt a little bit garbage, really, mustn't they? Now, I saw a little diary entry, and these are the questions that the people might have asked themselves. What are we supposed to do with the rest of our lives? What's the point of staying here in this camp? Why should we do any of this? Who cares about what Moses says? Now, the thing that's ridiculous is, through all of this, you've got to remember, not long ago, they'd seen 10 plagues sent by Yahweh. They'd seen the Red Sea parted. They'd seen what happened at Mount Sinai. They'd seen their God naturally fed them with manna. He provided water. But somehow all that completely goes out of their head because things aren't going very well. And they just completely forget about it. And I thought to myself, there are times when I completely forget about the things that God's done in my life. And if I take time and think back, I think to myself, wow, that was amazing. But sometimes we just forget and we get caught up in the mundaneness of our lives. And we forget how amazing the Lord is and how many amazing things He's done to bring us to where we are. And I think this was the problem that these people had, which was why they were easily distracted when Mr. Cool Korah comes along and promises them all these things that he can't deliver. It's like JP once said, he said, the thing with sin is very appealing, but it never satisfies and it never delivers what it promises. See, Korah wouldn't be saying to them, you've got to keep the Torah. He wouldn't have been telling them that. He was already saying some of the commandments were ridiculous. Now, given the situation they were in as well, they had three choices. They could go back to Egypt, which is one choice. Now we know that we've seen people, things don't go well for them, supposedly following the Lord, and it doesn't quite work out the way they'd hoped. Now, I read a commentary. It says this: we can and many do, instead of walking with the Holy One as the Kedoshim, which is holy people He called us to be, we can just surrender to our society's values. We can accept even its sickest perversions as merely alternative lifestyles. We can immerse ourselves in whatever gets us through the night. We can get by with a little help from our friends. And then it goes on to say, after all, the Egypts of today do have their attractions. We can numb our consciences through just turning on the television, watching a film, or whatever. We can choose to just look like the pagans around us, talk like them, eat and drink like them, date and marry like them. We can do all these things. And the sooner we realise though that there is no meaning in a life like that, the sooner we can discard it, and as I was saying, it's not an option. what they're saying to you. Now, the second alternative is to elect a captain. Okay. Now, this is what they actually did, didn't it? They opted for this character called Korah. Now, instead of taking on the responsibility for themselves, and this is we do see this in Christianity today, don't we? We see people who mindlessly, cluelessly soak themselves in sermonettes that are prepared by whatever leader they choose, and it's always one that doesn't offend them or convict them. Well, not too much anyway. You know, if you get the drift. And now and again, get dressed up, put on your religious mask, go and talk with basically other Egyptians who are in denial, who won't even accept that they're Egyptians, all doing the same thing, all pretending that they're living the life that God has called them to live. Now, it goes on, doesn't it? Sing a few hymns, it's pantomime. Elect a leader, this is what he is effectively. He's a professional who's paid to make people feel good about themselves. He might say the odd thing that convicts them a little bit. They never push him too far. He just wants to make them feel like, oh, we've been challenged. Are you with me? And that's what a lot of people will do. They'll either go back to Egypt, go fully indulge in the pleasures of the world has to offer, or they'll find somebody who's not going to challenge them and drag them along to learn how the Lord wants things done. He's just going to give them this sense of, oh, this is all going swimmingly, but it's all a charade. The alternative is really rather unpopular, as we can see from the fact that churches or assemblies like ours aren't exactly massive. Because the alternative is basically teshuvah, which is repentance. To live is Torah, to live the way He wanted us to live. To be the people He's called us to be and created us to be. Surrender with all our heart, with all our soul and all our strength to Him. Stop looking for excuses. Just do it. Surrender. I remember when the first time the Lord moved in my heart to tell me and lay on me His truth was when I knelt down. And it was, I don't know why, but it felt like it was the first time I'd ever really done it. And I prayed to Him and I just said, I surrender everything I surrender. And it was at that moment, looking back, that He met me. And took me out of the darkness and out of the lies and out of the nonsense that these leaders would have me following. And this is what the Lord wants us to do. Surrender to, return to Him, to live the way He chose us to live. Not man's idea, but His idea. Now, when you make that decision, I think everybody in the room is aware that there's consequences. And the biggest lot of flack that you'll get, sadly, isn't from the world, but it's from people involved in the pantomime. It's the Egyptians in denial who think they're living as God would intend them to, who are basically following their own hearts and the ideas of men. Now, these are the people who need things like pretty buildings and music and things to give them a sense of feeling holy. That's not what the Lord's all about. He's real, He's tangible. He's not in the trappings. That's not where He's to be found. I think it's brilliant when He talks about the days. This is Yahweh talking in His word, and He says, I long for the days. And He doesn't talk about in the temple, in Solomon's temple. He talks about the days in the tabernacle. The Lord's not interested in big and fancy. He's interested in intimacy. Now, For those who say it's difficult, I'm just going to read from Deuteronomy 30, 11 to 14, because we all need to remember this. The commandments which I command you this day, it's not too hard for you, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven that you should say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it to us, and make us to hear it, that we may do it. Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it to us, and make us to hear it, that we may do it. But the word is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. Now, we're going to move on to Numbers 16, verse 1. And I'm just going to read and then explain something that I mentioned before. Now Korah, son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, he took himself along with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, that's the one I mentioned before, son of Peleth, descendants of Reuben. The thing to bear in mind is the tribe of Reuben was camped near the Kohathites, and there's a saying which is this: happy is a righteous man and happy is his neighbour. Now bear in mind, the ones who were camped near Moses, they did really well. All them tribes did well. And then the other flip side is woe to the wicked and woe to his neighbour. So bear in mind, the ones who were camped near the Kohathites, where the rebellion sprouted out, were the ones who got dragged into it. There's a bit of a message in that, I believe, which is basically be careful who you associate with and get too close to. And also, this is where, remember the 12 spies who went out? The two who came back with a good report happened to be two who were together, you with me? And it was the other pairs, they all came back. They were together. So whoever you couple yourself with and you join yourself to is important. Now, the verb at the beginning of this is Vayikha, which explains what Korah was like. It says, and he took, because he was a taker. And he took the hearts of men, and he did it with fancy words, all dressed up in this sense of fairness, political correctness, whatever you want to call it. Now, what's interesting is the old sages say that it's not when a man is poor, not when a man has no position, that you can have a true testament. It's when a man has got some wealth and some power. That's when he's truly tested. And you can see from this whole story, as Korah, as his influence grew, you can see the result of what happened. Verse 2 says, to rise up against Moses together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community chosen in the assembly, men of repute. This was a big deal. 250 men of repute. This isn't a small thing. This is a massive, massive deal. It says they combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you've gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and Yahweh is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above Yahweh's congregation? Now what Korah is actually accusing Moses of is what he's guilty of himself. He's accusing Moses of self-promotion. The laugh is, Moses is innocent. Moses is there by divine appointment. Korah's accusing him of something that's in his own heart. And how often do we do that ourselves? Point the finger. Actually, if we think about it, ooh, that's me then. And what he was doing basically was building on the opportunity provided by the discontent of the camp. They'd forgotten, right, all about the miracles. Now they were in a place, and this might be of importance, which is the desert of Paran. This is the land where Ishmael was from. Bear in mind that Ishmael, his name means donkey of a man. Irrelevant scoffer whose hand is against every man. This is the region that they're in. That's quite apt, really, isn't it? Sinai is long since gone. Sinai and the loveliness of, that's all gone behind them. Now they're in the land of the scoffer, and we can see what's happening. Now, an interesting point to the scene as well was that Moses and Aaron are hated. Why are they hated? And this is something that you'll see throughout the script. They're hated because Yahweh has elevated them. Now, we know, don't we, that Jewish people have been hated. Why are they hated? Because Yahweh has elevated them. We as Israelites, when we keep Torah, why do we get this flack? Why do we get this far? Because God has chosen us. Are you with me? Whenever God chooses his people, he says you will be a people above other nations. That's why we're hated. The world hates us because God has elevated them and put us above other nations. Now, obviously, within this nation, the Lord elevated Moses and Aaron, but they're even more despised, if you get me drift. Right, so what we've got is Moses and Aaron who are hated. Then along comes, like I said, fancy pants Korah, who's basically appealing to, to all the fleshly desires and their emotions. You can just, the kind of, no. The kind of thing. Yeah, he's right, no. He would have just told them all the things that they wanted to hear. But what's even more interesting is what he's done is he's actually subtly twisted the scripture, because the Lord had said, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So he's took that idea of what the Lord has said and then he's used it. I don't know, why did we're a kingdom of So he's basically getting something and applying it just as he sees fit. But what he's actually forgetting is the fact that these people, they were called to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. But when the Lord tried to speak to them, he only got to 2 commandments. And they actually said, in Exodus 20, verses 18 to 21, it says, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. They didn't want that kind of relationship. It's insane. They didn't want the land, promised land. They denied that. It's like, oh. So they can't have it both ways, can they? They're taking something that God promised them that they've refused and rejected, and still trying to apply it. And there's a thing here which I've written down. Basically, having rejected the condition that Yahweh placed upon his promise, Korah sought to invoke the promise anyway. How many people do we know who do that? The promise of eternal life. I'll have a bit of that. I think that sounds great. Really? But hang on, there's a condition. The Lord wants you to repent, to surrender, and to return to Him. I like the promise though. The promise sounds great. You've got to repent. You've got to turn from your ways and turn to Him. Yeah. What was that bit about the promise again? Are you with me? Now, because of the way he's putting his message across, the people buy it. And they always do, because they've got itching ears and it's what they want to hear. Yeah, cool. Now, it's interesting that Moses says, he says, a prophet will come like unto me, and it was a reference to Yeshua that. And Yeshua, like Moses, was questioned. He wasn't. See, what you've got is all these people, like Korah, saying, oh no, don't worry about that, don't do this. Don't remember that. Moses speaks the truth, and they all start questioning him. The same thing happened to Yeshua. And that's why in John 12:49 he says, for I have not spoken on my own authority. This is what they were accusing Moses of, wasn't it? He says, but the Father who sent me has given me a commandment, what to say and what to speak. So, when you read about Moses, bear in mind that there is parallels between him and Yeshua, as there is with the high priest Aaron, because as we know, Yeshua is our high priest. And it says, when Moses heard this, he fell on his face. He could have been dead tempted to say, right, hang on a minute, dying in the desert with me as a go-between between you and God is exactly what you asked for. So tough, just live with it. But he didn't do that. It says here, then he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, good morning, Yahweh will make known who is his and who is holy, and will grant him access to himself. He will grant access to the one he has chosen. Do this, you Korah and all your band, take fire pans, and tomorrow put fire in them and lay incense on them before Yahweh. Then the man who Yahweh chooses, he shall be the Holy One. You've gone too far, sons of Levi. Like, what's interesting is at no point in this little section does it say Yahweh spoke to Moses. Are you with me? It just goes straight into and Moses said. So it actually puts us in the position of, hang on a minute, is he just speaking his own words? Or is the Lord speaking through him? Now look, you've got to bear in mind the challenge he's offered Think of it in terms of what happened to Nadab and Abihu. When they brought fire before the Lord, consumed. So he's offering them a challenge here. It's basically a life or death challenge, isn't it? Because they've all seen what's happened to Nadab and Abihu. If you bring fire and you're not chosen of God, that's it, you've had it. So this shows you how deceived these 250 were. They were prepared to go in, to offer this incense. They would have had to go into a place where only the Kohanim were supposed to go. They know what happens when you do things that the Lord doesn't want to do, and yet they're that deceived and that full and pumped up with their own sense of self-righteousness and fairness that they're going to go in and do it anyway. Now Moses knows as well, he's seen it all happen. So this challenge is quite a big thing that he's laid down. Now Moses said further to Korah, "Hear me, sons of Levi. Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you access to it, to perform the duty of Yahweh's tabernacle, and to minister to the community and to serve them? Now that he has advanced you and all your fellow Levites with you, who you seek the priesthood to, truly it is against Yahweh that you and all your company have banded together. But who is Aaron that you should rail against him?" Note that Moses recognises it's not against him, it's not against Aaron that this rebellion is, it's against Yahweh. Right, verse 12 says, "Moses sent for Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, but they said, 'We will not come.' It is not enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, that you would also lord it over us." This is the attitude of these people at the time. It says, even if you had brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey and given us possession of fields and vineyards, should you gouge out those men's eyes, we will not come. Basically he's saying, even if you send people to gouge our eyes out, we're still not going to come. Moses was much aggrieved, and he said to Yahweh, "Pay no regard to their oblation. I have not taken the ass of any one of them, nor have I wronged any of them." And Moses said to Korah, "Tomorrow you and all your company appear before Yahweh, you and they and Aaron. Each of you take his firepan, lay incense on it, and each of you bring his firepan before Yahweh," as I said before, to a place where only the Kohanim were supposed to go. And it says, each of them took his firepan, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and took his place at the entrance of the tent of meeting, as did Moses and Aaron. Korah gathered the whole community against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then the presence of Yahweh appeared to the whole community. Now, the Hebrew, when it says Korah assembled against them, there's this idea of it was with mockery, with words of mockery. And because this incense would have been offered first thing in the morning, what Korah would have been doing all night, it's believed, is basically going round, basically saying to everybody, "Stand for this nonsense. We're not having this, are we?" So he would have all night, because it says the whole congregation was basically there. He got basically all of Israel railed up against Moses and Aaron. And then it says, "And Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Stand back from this community that I may annihilate them in an instant." This is the lot of them. This is how angry the Lord is with this. It says, "But they fell on their faces and said, O God, source of the breath of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be wrathful with the whole community?" And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the community and say, withdraw from about the abodes of Korah, Dathan and Abiram." This is the point again. He says, don't hang around with those who are in error. I think we have to let this sink into ourselves as well. Get well clear of the people who are in error. Withdraw from them. Stay well clear of them. Don't be dragged in and dragged down like them, lest you suffer judgment. Because rebellion gets rebellion. Contentment begets contentment. Now 25 says, Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, the elders of Israel, following him. You can just see it all done. I don't know whether that's what. Verse 26 says, he addressed the community saying, "Move away from the tents of these wicked men and touch nothing that belongs to them, lest you be wiped out for all their sins." Again, move away. So they withdrew from the abodes of Korah, Dathan and Abiram. Now Dathan and Abiram had come out, and they stood at the entrance of their tents with their wives, their children and their little ones. In the original Hebrew, when it says they went out, it's basically implying that they went out standing up and that they had a haughtiness to them, like a cursing and blaspheming, because the same word's used when it talks about Goliath when he went out to confront the Israelites. Verse 28 says, "And Moses said, By this you shall know that it was Yahweh who sent me to do all these things, that they were not of my own devising. If these men die, as all men do, if their lot be the common fate of all mankind, it was not Yahweh who sent me. But if Yahweh brings about something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, you shall know that these men have spurned Yahweh." Scarcely had he finished speaking all these words when the ground under then burst asunder. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, all Korah's people and all their possessions. They went down alive into Sheol with all that belonged to them. The earth closed over them, and they vanished from the midst of the congregation. And this verse here is quite harrowing. It says, "All Israel around them fled at their shrieks." Well, they said the earth might swallow us. I can only just imagine. They fled from the sound of their shrieks. This must have been absolutely terrifying to see the ground open up. Can you imagine the screams? And they fled. And it's a lesson. See, it's a lesson every time we look at the Torah. Don't be in the vicinity and hang around with those in it. Verse 35 says, "And a fire went forth from Yahweh and consumed the 250 men offering the incense." So he took them out as well, because it wasn't what he wanted. It wasn't what he'd ordained. In Exodus 34:7, the Lord, it says this, "He that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, and on the children's children, on the third and fourth generation, because he's faithful to his people, to the vulnerable, to the vulnerable basically. He's fearless, and he's a fearless redeemer of hopeless people, but he has to be a wrathful judge of people who are irredeemably arrogant, oppressors, and people who are cruel deceivers. See, because he loves us so much, when anybody tries to lead us astray, he can't hack it. Are you with me? This is an example for us here of what the Lord thinks of people who try to lead his people astray. He will not stand for it. Now, I want us to remember these words. These are because this is the wrathful side of God. And if we've experienced that in our lives, I just want us to remember this bit of scripture, which is Isaiah 54:6-8. It says this: "Yahweh has called you as a wife forsaken and grieved in spirit, even a wife of youth when she is cast off, says your God. For a small moment have I forsaken you, but with great mercies will I gather you. In overflowing wrath I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting loving kindness will I have mercy on you, says Yahweh your Redeemer." That's beautiful. Love that. Everlasting loving kindness will I have mercy on you. So we allow him to discipline us, and it teaches us to fear him, which is a good thing, because we have to remember that we can only claim his promises when we adhere to the conditions of the covenant. And the thing we have to remember, it's interesting, Dave said last night, is that we commit ourselves to live humbly before him, to tremble at his word, and to teach his ways. Now, the other thing to bear in mind, which we've touched on a few times as well lately, is that when things go wrong, we can't always turn around and blame, for example, it's the devil made me do it, or the rulers, or the leader made me do it, or whoever, because we have to remember that Satan, no leader, nobody has the power to do anything to us unless Yahweh permits it. Now, the thing we learn if we do go through a time of judgment is to fear him and to humbly come before him in repentance and to turn to him. Right, Numbers 17 verse 1. Can you see the picture of what's happened there though? There's a few lessons, isn't it? Don't hang around with the wicked, or those who are in error. The best attitude to have towards our God is to fear Him, to be humble before Him. And Numbers 17 verse 1 says, Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, order Eleazar son of Aaron the priest to remove the fire pans before, for they have become sacred from among the charred remains, and scatter the coals abroad. Remove the fire pans of those who have sinned at the cost of their lives, and let them be made into hammered sheets as plating for the altar. For once they have been used for offering to Yahweh, they have become sacred. And let them serve as a warning to the people of Israel. Eleazar the priest took the copper fire pans which had been used for offering by those who died in the fire, and they were hammered into plating for the altar. As Yahweh had ordered him through Moses, as Yahweh had ordered him through Moses, it was a reminder to the Israelites so that no outsider, one not of Adam's offspring, should presume to offer incense before Yahweh and suffer the fate of Korah and his band. Now, next day, excuse me, the whole Israelite community, this is unbelievable, railed against Moses and Aaron. This is mad, isn't it? They've just seen what's happened, and they're saying here, you two hated they are. You two have brought death upon Yahweh's people. But as the community gathered against them, Moses and Aaron turned towards the tent of meeting, and the cloud had covered it, and the presence of Yahweh appeared. When Moses and Aaron reached the tent of meeting, Yahweh said to Moses, spoke to Moses, saying, remove yourselves from this community that I may annihilate them in an instant. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces. Then Moses said to Aaron, take the fire pan, put it on the fire from the altar, add incense and take it quickly to the community and make expiation for them. For wrath has gone forth from Yahweh, the plague has begun. Aaron took it, as Moses had ordered, and ran to the midst of the congregation where the plague had begun among the people. He put on the incense and made expiation for the people. He stood between the living and the dead until the plague was checked. Isn't this remarkable? These people have just been up in a big uprising. 250 leaders, and you've got Korah, Dathan and Abiram. The 250 leaders have just been frazzled because they've just tried to challenge Moses and Aaron. All the households have been swallowed up by the earth of these people who basically led the rebellion. The next day, the people are still, I can't get my head around it. I do try and look at this and see myself in it, but I do have to, at this point, go, it must have been mental. They turn around and say, right, you, Moses and Aaron, you killed all of God's people. Hang on a minute, what's going on? So as a result of this plague has gone out, and this verse here says, Aaron had to go out with the incense. He says he stood between the living and the dead. This also makes me laugh. The rabbis say what actually happened was, I don't know whether I can take this very seriously. It says he took hold of the angel and held him against his will. This is the angel of death. This is what they believe Aaron did. And the angel said to him, hey, hang on, allow me to complete what I'm doing. And Aaron said, no, what's happened? Can you imagine he's got hold of the angel of death like apparently. Moses said, I've got to come and stop you. And the angel of death says, hey, hang on, I'm from Yahweh. Get off with you. And then apparently Aaron says to him, hey, hang on though. But what you're forgetting is everything Moses says, he says from God, doesn't he? Come on, he's with God now, over by the tent of meeting. Let's go and ask him. That's what they think happened. I don't think it quite happened then. Another interpretation is this. They ask themselves, why was it with incense that he went out? And they believe it's because the Israelites were slandering the incense, saying that it was a poison. And they said, well, Nadab and Abihu died because of it. And then these 250 people were burned because of it. And the Lord wanted to make it clear it was not to do with the incense. The reason that all this happened was because of sin. So, the thing that we have to bear in mind is that when judgment begins in the house of God, we've got a high priest who's got incense burning for a place for us to come and run. He makes expiation for us. Because Aaron's just the type, isn't he? He's a shadow of the high priest that we have, who is Yeshua. And it says in verse 14, it says, those who died of the plague came to 14,700. This is aside from those who died as a result of Korah and the ground getting swallowed up and all that. So, I mean, it's just a figure, isn't it? 14,700. But think of it in real terms. Think if you were actually there, and people just start dropping dead. 14,700. That's an awful lot of people. Can you imagine it? And then you've got, for every person who's dying, there's probably about 5 people know them and are upset and all screaming as well. And then you've got Aaron running through the middle of them with this incense burning, and it's just the most crazy scene, isn't it? See, but what they didn't realise was how toxic, how utterly toxic it is, complaining and coming against what God's plan is. Because that's not what we're called to do. We're called to build each other up. We're not called to put fingers in question, and we're just called to serve and be obedient. Now, I keep saying, don't I, that this is like looking in a mirror when we look at these scriptures, and there's a wonderful bit in 1 Corinthians 10, 11 to 12, it says, now all these happened to them as examples. They were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. So, this is all for our benefit. All these things happen to these people for our benefit, so we wouldn't make these mistakes. And some people say these judgments are horrendous. How can this sounds like a cruel God that you're on about here, but no, because if it hadn't been done it the way it was done, it would have been ineffective. And he has a plan. He has a plan for us. And if anybody tries to get in the way of it, he's a father. And there's an example. If you see your kid walking down a path and a snake pops its head out, you'll get a shovel and chop the snake's head off, won't you? You won't even think about it. If your child goes to put his hand in the fire, bang, you smack the child and you don't even think about it. It's instinctive, and our Father in heaven instinctively wants to protect us. Now, we have our own sense of right and wrong, don't we? But it's tarnished. We have to remember this, and we can't get away from it. We have to trust Him. Verse 15 says, Aaron then returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting, since the plague was checked. Now, yeah, just bear this in mind. This whole business with Moses and Aaron. We've seen previously that the 10 Commandments was like the preamble to a betrothal covenant. Yeah? Now, all it was about was empowering us to be His bride. Now, for the sake of this to happen, what had to happen is for us to get to know Him according to His protocol. He provided what's called the Mishkan, and that's where we'd have meetings with Him. But the people of Israel, remember, they said, "Oh no, don't speak to us." So they wanted intermediaries. So we discovered the intermediaries. Oh, this, the friend of the bridegroom who would speak on behalf of Yahweh. That was Moses. The friends of the bride who would speak on behalf of the people. That was Aaron and his sons. So for this to continue, we needed Aaron and his sons and Moses to be in power. So they're having a go at Moses and Aaron is then breaking the covenant and basically cutting off relationship with Yahweh. Do you see? You see how utterly ridiculous this is and how serious it is? Because this is how Yahweh meets with the people and how the relationship is fostered and nurtured. And they're basically coming against all that. And that's why He acted the way He did. Now verse 16 says, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and take from them, from the chieftains of their ancestral houses, one staff for each chieftain of an ancestral house, 12 staffs in all. Inscribe each man's name on his staff, there being one staff for each head of an ancestral house. Also inscribe Aaron's name on the staff of Levi. Deposit them in the tent of meeting before the pact where I meet with you. The staff of the man whom I choose shall sprout, and I will rid myself of of the incessant mutterings of the Israelites against you. The Lord's taking it personally. No. What I think's nuts is, they've seen 14,700 people die. They've seen Aaron run out with his incense and stand between the living and the dead, and they still need further reinforcement of the fact that Aaron is the chosen one. It's insane, isn't it? And sometimes maybe we're this mad, and the Lord's looking at us in our lives and going, what? I couldn't make it clear to you. So we have to bear that in mind when we read all this. Now, there's some interesting things about this rod. The Hebrew word that's translated as rod is pronounced matter. And the verb root of the word is nator. And this verb root means to stretch out, to extend, to spread out, to offer by an outstretched hand as food to an animal, for example. And there's two examples of this that you can find in Genesis, this nator. The first one is Abraham coming to Mount Moriah. Basically, he says he made nator with regard to his tent. And what that actually meant was he built an altar. So the thing that he did was, it says here, Abraham removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent. It says nator his tent, having Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar unto the Holy One, called on the name of the Holy One. So what Abraham did with his tent, i.e. extended it and made it into an altar, is a picture of what Aaron's to do on behalf of the bride, i.e. the people. He's to extend it, to enlarge it and incorporate it into an altar life and into calling on the name of Yahweh. And the second one is with regards to getting a bride for Isaac. And this is what it says. This is with regards to Rebecca. I will say, please let down nator your pitcher that I may drink. She will say, drink, and I will also give your camels a drink. So what she did with her pitcher of water, she held it out for the servants of Abraham to drink from it, and that represents what Aaron's to do on behalf of the bride, the people. He was to take whatever the people were willing to pour out and to present it to Yahweh. The picture of what his job was. And the thing with the rods, it's meant as a sign for hope. Bear in mind, they've been told you're going to die in the wilderness. There's been all these people died, getting swallowed by the earth, and then 14,700 have been killed in a plague. The rods, this test, is actually a sign of hope, because the almond tree is the first tree to blossom in spring, and it's a sign of new life after winter. They've basically been through a winter, haven't they? A horrible, dark, cold time. Now, yeah, it says in verse 21, Moses spoke thus to the Israelites. The chieftains gave him a staff for each chieftain of an ancestral house, 12 staffs in all. Among these staffs was the staff of Aaron. Like, among the staffs. In other words, it wasn't put in a special place, any different than the rest, it was just amongst them all. Verse 22 says, Moses deposited the staffs before Yahweh in the tent of the pact. The next day Moses entered the tent of the pact, and there the staff of Aaron and the house of Levi had sprouted it, and brought forth sprouts, produced blossoms, and borne almonds. So, quite a sign really, isn't it? Now the Hebrew word for the name almond is shaked, and it's derived from a Hebrew verb root which means to be watchful, to be alert, to never slumber or to sleep. And you can get an idea of the meaning of it from Jeremiah 1, 11 to 12. And it says, Moreover, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Jeremiah, what see you? I said, I see a rod of an almond tree, which is Makel Shaked. Then said the Holy One to me, You have seen well, I am watching, which is also the word Shaked, to see that my word is asad, which means done, lived out, fulfilled. So we've got a connection here between doing the Torah and the budding of the almond tree. Are you with me? Now the other thing to bear in mind is, how did this staff bud and produce all these fruits by being in the presence of the Almighty and the Torah. Verse 24, Moses then brought out all the staffs from before Yahweh to the Israelites, each identified and recovered his staff. And then some people say the miracle isn't that Aaron's staff covered, it's that the other 11 didn't, given they've been in the proximity to the Torah and in the presence of Yahweh. Now, people are like that, aren't they? We know that, don't we? Some people you can tell them all about the Torah, invite them in to be in the presence of God, and just somehow it just doesn't have any effect on their lives at all. And verse 25 says, Yahweh said to Moses, put Aaron's staff back before the pact to be kept as a lesson to rebels, so that their mutterings against me may cease, lest they die. He realised this was against him. We could say it was against Moses and Aaron, but it wasn't. It was against Yahweh. This Moses did just as Yahweh had commanded him, so he did. But the Israelites said to Moses, Lo, we perish, we are lost, all of us lost. Everyone who so much as ventures near Yahweh's tabernacle must die. Alas, we are doomed to perish. And you could think, this sounds rubbish, but this is actually good. We've learned to fear the Lord. This is an expression of humility. They've actually come to a good place now. They've learned something from it. Now, what's really bizarre about this whole thing about the staff and everything that's gone on is this. All the events took place over 3 days and 3 nights. And this 3 days and 3 nights were the time, the testing and the proving. And there was questions asked. They were asked to Moses and to Aaron, and questions like, are these your words? Or are you really speaking Yahweh's words? Are you really Yahweh's chosen one? Do you really stand between life and death? And do you have the power to save by your own appointment? And what we've got then is 3 days and 3 nights, and then we've got the budding of the staff, which is a sign of resurrection. And I don't think it's any coincidence that in Isaiah 11, 1-2, we see this whole thing about the Lord being referred to as a branch, and this is what it says here. And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. That's talking about our Messiah. The words here that are used, stem, the root word is gazer, which means to cut down. Now this is, I think, fascinating. The word for branch is netzer. Now, I just want to make you think of there's actually a place called Branchtown. I'll think where it might be. Branch is netzer. There's actually a town, and bizarrely enough, it was named by David's descendants who were wondering who was going to be the one to promise. It's called Branchtown, but in their language it's pronounced Nazareth. Bizarre, isn't it? Matthew 2:23, he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. That's where it was spoken of by the prophets. Now the word for root is shirash, which means the root out will be uprooted. So what it's telling us in the scripture is the branch will come out of a cut out, uprooted, dead system, but will bring life. We see other examples of it. Isaiah 4:2, in that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious. Amazing. Oh, sorry, just gets me something. And the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and complete for them that are escaped of Israel. Now what's interesting here is the word for branch is samach, which also means it's a branch that blossoms and sprouts. We read in Jeremiah 23:5, it says, behold, the days come, said, it primarily refers to the tabernacle, but it can also include all holy things, the Torah, the Shabbat, the Moedim feasts. and the offerings. Now, you can say, what is a sin associated with mikdash? And if we look at it, the Hebrew word for sin it's pronounced ovon, and its meaning is perversity, depravity, iniquity, guilt or punishment of iniquity. And the Hebrew root from which the noun avan is derived, ovon is derived, is avar. Now, this verb root carries the idea of a burden or limitation that twists and distorts. And if we look at the letters of it, each letter's got a picture. And the first letter is an ayin, and it's the pictograph of a human soul. The second is vav, which is a Hebrew picture of a nail. And the hey, which you were getting the other day, is a Hebraic picture of a window in a tent through which one sees the world and through which one receives fresh air and refreshing breezes. But if you put all these pictures together to form the pictograph, it says this, it's the window through which one sees the human soul being nailed shut. So avar therefore represents that which separates man from Yahweh, which keeps man from seeing Yahweh as he is, which interferes with a man receiving from Yahweh. That's where we get sin from. Now, this root verb, avar, which means these things, if you make it avon, what you do is you add the last letter changes and becomes the nun soffit. That's a Hebraic symbol of the Messiah, which is bizarre because it now means that the Hebraic picture is a situation where something in a person or in their life which prevents that person from seeing, recognizing and receiving life from the Messiah. That's what sin is. That's bizarre. If you look at it in the Hebraic pictographs, sin is something in your life that stops you from recognizing and receiving life from the Messiah. And if you are to avon, which is to sin, anything to do with the holy things, that refers to anything regarding the Torah, the Shabbat, the Moedim, the offerings. So a willful refusal to be obedient, that can include turning the Lord's Torah into a set of rules. Doesn't mean just being disobedient, given that what it is to sin is to refuse to receive life and revelation from Messiah. If we turn his Torah into a set of rules, that's a sin, isn't it? Because it's stopping us from receiving life from him. We've turned it into something it's not meant to be. So the function of the priest is to carry this sin of the people, take the weight of it. And remember, he's just an earthly representative of what Yeshua does. Verse 2 says, "You shall also associate with yourselves your kinsmen, the tribe of Levi, your ancestral tribe, to be attached to you and to minister to you, while you and your sons under your charge are before the tent of the pact." He's basically saying you've got to get close back to the Levites, the ones who rebelled against you. You've got to get close to them, because Levi comes from the word levar, which is actually an affectionate term. So he's not even just saying just be kind of like work colleagues. It's actually saying I want your relationship built up again. Now, I was thinking about this. I was thinking, so they go back to being Levites and stuff, and then they're doing all this. You know, people would have to come to them, wouldn't they, and got this guilt offering and all do. Now, bear in mind the tribe that were in rebellion, who were like kind of like head honchos in rebellion with the Reubenites. Can you imagine the first time the Reubenites had to go and talk? Not just guilt offering, it must have been that awkward, wasn't it? But the Lord wanted all this healing. He wanted things to go back to the way they were meant to be all along, which is his way. Verse 3, it says, "They shall discharge their duties to you and to the tent as a whole, but they must not have any contact with the furnishings of the shrine or with the altar, lest both they and you die. They shall be attached to you and discharge the duties of the tent of meeting, all the service of the tent, but no outsider shall intrude upon you. As you discharge the duties connected with the shrine and the altar, that wrath may not again strike the Israelites. I hereby take your fellow Levites from among the Israelites, they are assigned to you in dedication to Yahweh, to do the work of the tent of meeting. Yeah. So Yahweh just wants him to know that he's, first of all, he's got to be reconciled with his brethren, the Levites. While you and your sons should be careful to perform your priestly duties in everything pertaining to the altar and to what is behind the curtain, and make your priesthood a service of dedication. Any outsider who encroaches should be put to death. Right, the altar is for the individual worshippers, and behind the veil is where Yahweh promised to meet for atonement for the whole nation. We've got Yeshua, who does both them things for us. Verse 8 says, Yahweh spoke further to Anna, I hereby give you charge of my gifts. All the sacred donations of the Israelites, I grant them to you and to your sons as a prerequisite, all due for all time. When he says here, I hereby give you charge of my gifts, the actual Hebrew connotations of the word means that it's an expression of joy. Behold, hey, look what I've given you. That's how it's kind of expressed. Now, verse 9 says, this shall be yours from the most holy sacrifices, the offerings by fire. Every such offering that they render to me is most holy sacrifices, namely every meal offering, sin offering, and guilt offering of theirs shall belong to you and your sons. You shall partake of them as most sacred donations, only males may eat them, you shall treat them as consecrated. This too shall be yours, the gift offerings of the contributions, all the elevation offerings of the Israelites, I give to you, to your sons, and to the daughters that are with you, as a due for all time. Every one of your household who is clean may eat it. All the best of the new oil, wine, and grain, the choice parts that they present to Yahweh, I will give to you. The first fruits of everything in the land that they bring to Yahweh shall be yours. Every one of your household who is clean may eat them. Everything that has been prescribed in Israel shall be yours. First issue of the womb of every being, man or beast, that is offered to Yahweh shall be yours. But you shall have the firstborn of man redeemed, and you shall also have the firstling of unclean animals redeemed. Take as their redemption price from the age of 1 month up, the money equivalent of 5 shekels by the sanctuary weight, which is 20 gerahs. But the firstlings of cattle, sheep, or goats may not be redeemed, they are consecrated. You shall dash their blood against the altar, turn their fat into smoke as an offering by fire, for a pleasing odour to Yahweh. But their meat shall be yours. It shall be yours like the breast of elevation offering and like the right thigh. All the sacred gifts of the Israelites set aside for Yahweh I will give to you, to your sons and to the daughters who are with you, as a due for all time. It shall be an everlasting covenant of salt before Yahweh with you and for your offspring as well. When it says an eternal covenant of salt, it enacts the covenant with Aaron, and it's with an object that's wholesome and lasting, and it's also something that keeps other foodstuffs wholesome and stops things from spoiling. Now, I know I've gone past what I normally do, but I'm just going to explain quickly, because we're nearly at the end, what a covenant is in the Hebraic mindset, because I think it's a bit different than what we've been led to believe it is. This is how it's explained in one of the commentaries I found. A covenant is a forward-looking relationship agreement. The stronger covenant partner is known as the suzerain. This is what happens. He commits himself to provide protection, provision, and nurture for the weaker partner, who's called the vassal. Now, the weaker partner commits himself to seek no other protector, provider, or nurturer, and to do everything that the suzerain directs. Now, sometimes the suzerain covenants with a vassal to conditionally place some item of valuable property, which is known as a nachalah, in the stewardship of the vassal for a period of time and under conditions that the suzerain sets forth. And an incidental benefit may flow to the vassal, but the arrangement is primarily for the benefit of the suzerain. Now, when this nachalah is in the vassal's care, he can't treat it as it's his own and do with it as he wants. He can only do with the item what the suzerain authorises him to do with it. The allotment of the land in Israel, which each tribe was assigned, was that tribe's nachalah. You with me? We're the vassals, he's the suzerain. Anything that he gives to us, this nachalah, is always, still is, and it's still under his rules and his guidelines. Right? Now what's interesting as well is it says they were stewards of the land, but it was under Yahweh's terms and conditions, Yahweh being the suzerain of the covenant. But the Holy One also instructed the Levites that they would have as a nachala the tithes presented by the 12 tribes from the produce of the respected nachala. Thus, the livelihood would always depend upon the well-being, materially and spiritually, of the 12 tribes. And thus the Levites were given a tremendous incentive to see that all of Israel prospered. Because Yahweh had said to them, Yahweh said to Adam, you shall however have no territorial share among them, or any portion in their midst. I am your portion and your share among the Israelites. So, our God, He's our suzerain. He's promised to provide for us, to protect us, to nurture us, and us as the weaker one in the covenant. All we have to promise is to look for no other protector, no other provider. Why would we want it anyway? And when He gives us something, we have to just, okay, under your rules and your instructions and your guidelines. Now, verse 21 says, and to the Levites I hereby give all the tithes in Israel as their share in return for the services that they perform, the services of the tent of meeting. Henceforth Israelites shall not trespass on the tent of meeting and thus incur guilt and die. Only Levites shall perform the services of the tent of meeting, others will incur guilt. It is the law for all time throughout the ages. But they shall have no territorial share among the Israelites. But it is the tithe set aside by the Israelites as a gift to Yahweh, that I give to the Levites as their share. Therefore I have said concerning them, they shall have no territorial share among the Israelites. Now, bear in mind, we cannot biblically tithe. Because a biblical tithe, if we actually follow the scriptures, has to be taken to a certain place, has to be given to certain people, Levites and poor every third year. We can't actually do it biblically. Or if anybody tries to lay it on you, like it says to do it, hang on, you can say, well, actually no. That doesn't mean to say no. See, this is the thing. The law, the Torah, is put down for us to understand God's heart. And God's heart is that out of the abundance that we get, we are to provide for those who are less fortunate, or for those who look after us and help us. I'm just making the point that if you wanted to truly biblically tithe, you would have to go up to the temple to do it, and you'd have to go to Jerusalem. So I'm just making that distinction now. Well, obviously, we read in the New Testament all the way through, Paul saying, look, if people, feed you, you should look after them and stuff like that. God's heart is not that anybody should go without. But we can't actually biblically, to the letter, tithe as well. We read in the likes of Deuteronomy, for example. Now, verse 25 says, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Levites and say to them, when you receive from the Israelites their tithes, which I have assigned to you as your share, you shall set aside from them 1/10 of the tithe as a gift to Yahweh. This shall be accounted to you as your gift, as with your new grain from the threshing floor or flow from the vat. The vat, basically, that was gifts of like wine and oil. Verse 28 says, so shall you on your part set aside a gift for Yahweh from all the tithes that you receive from the Israelites, and from them you shall bring the gift for Yahweh to Aaron the priest. You shall set aside all gifts due to Yahweh from everything that is donated to you, from each thing its best portion, the part thereof that is to be consecrated. Say to them further, when you have removed the best part from it, you Levites may consider it the same as the yield of the threshing floor or vat. You and your households may eat it anywhere, but it is your recompense for your services in the tent of meeting. You will incur no guilt through it once you have removed the best part from it, but you must not profane the sacred donations of the Israelites, lest you die. There you go. That's today's Torah portion. Sorry, it was there. Should we break? Should Reagan have some tea?